cloudy with a chance of showers.
And he bought some stock and he did some other things for me. Now, in the fall of 1980, my husband lost his election. We moved. So by 1981, when I gathered all my documents together to give to my accountant, I had a year-end statement from Stevens, which did not report anything about commodities. I had a year-end statement from the PV brokerage company, which reported a loss. And I had no year-end statement from either Clayton or the company called Ackley. So I think what happened is we bundled all of the documents we had, because I took all of the reports that I had, gave them to the accountant. And I believe that in the absence of a year-end statement, the accountant and my husband and I missed the fact that we had actually made some money in the Ackley account.
You don't remember the profit?
No, I did not remember that profit. I did not. And in fact, as you said, when some people looking at the records for me began looking at it originally, they looked at the records and they thought I'd had a $5,000 loss. And they came to me and said, "We think you had a loss, which you didn't report." And I said, "You know, I just don't remember. I thought I basically got out with what I put in." And then they went back and re-looked at it again with, you know, more accountants, and they came up with the gain. So it was hard to find, apparently.
With regard to the Refco account, just how did the procedure go? Did Mr. Blair basically recommend to you the transactions which you either said yes or no to, or was it based more on knowledge that you had gained, as some of your staff have suggested, from reading the papers or whatever? What happened?
Well, Britt, it was primarily Jim's suggestion, but I also did try to educate myself. You know, I did try to read some things. He actually gave me a few documents to read, because he had this theory that because of the economy in the early part of the 1970s, a lot of cattle herds had been liquidated, so that there was going to be a big opportunity to make money in the late 70s, and he gave me things to read about that. And I did occasionally read, you know, publications like the Journal and others, and, you know, I tried to educate myself because I took the responsibility seriously, but I relied primarily on his advice because he really spent an enormous amount of time studying the market and talking to many more people than I ever could have, people who, you know, ran feedlots or bought beef for large supermarket chains. So he would talk to me and he'd say, "Here's what I think is going on. What do you think?" Now, I did not make every trade he recommended, and certainly by July, when I began to, you know, get nervous about it, I stopped taking his recommendations because I just couldn't bear the risk anymore.
Did it concern you at the time that because of his position with the company that he represented, that there was an ethical question raised by your accepting this level of assistance in a financial manner for him?
No, it did not. And the reason it didn't is that he and his wife are among our very best friends. My husband performed their marriage ceremony. I was the best person at the wedding. We are very close friends. And I found it a little bit surprising that anyone would suggest that, because in 1980, right during the time that this was all going on, when my husband ran for re-election, Tyson supported his opponent. So there's really no basis for suggesting it was anything other than what it was, which was a friend who made a suggestion, and not just to me, but to a number of people, which I think was, you know, very fortunate for me. Yeah.
You said that there was no preferential treatment in all of this. The records indicated that your account was short of money at various points. Were there margin calls, and did you meet any of those calls? And were you aware at any time that Refco was coordinating trades to drive prices up or down?
No, I was not aware of that, Andrea. I was told that after I stopped trading some months later, and I know there were lawsuits filed alleging that. I don't think any of that was ever proved, at least that I'm aware of. And when my position was under margin, I would either close out my position or use the equity that I had. And I think Mr. Melamud said, based on his review of the records, there were a couple of occasions when I was under margin. Nobody ever called and asked me for anything. They just, I guess, took the money that I had in the account and closed out the position. but that was the responsibility of the broker. And from what I know, they were doing so many trades, and there was so much volume going through that. I was a relatively small customer. I mean, it was very big money for me and my family, but it was a very small account, and I don't think they paid any attention to my particular situation.
Why do you think that they gave you this treatment with you being such a small customer? Don't you think that was preferential treatment based upon who you were and who your husband was?
No, I really don't believe that. I don't think there's any evidence of that. You know, from what I know about commodity trading and what I know about the cattle market during that period of time, they were just buying and selling on a huge basis, day in and day out. And I think that they may have not gotten around to the paperwork. They may have not thought it was worth it. They may have seen that I was a regular customer and that I covered my losses, that there was never an occasion when they really had to be concerned about it. I can't read their minds or speculate, but I had absolutely no reason to believe that I got any favorable treatment. And the fact that I closed the account out and took my money, whereas the people whom I knew were much bigger traders, like Jim Blair and others, they lost money. And why would Jim Blair try to help me get favorable treatment that he couldn't get for himself? I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me at all.
Mrs. Glenn, one of the things that has made all of this so controversial is the shifting accounts of what happened, because initially the White House explained that you were consulting Blair and many others and reading the Wall Street Journal, and then later had to correct that, and we found out that Mr. Blair was in fact most often placing your trades for you, phoning the trades in. Why was the account, why did the account have to be corrected? Why was it not explained accurately the first time?
Well, Linda, I think it's because, you know, we're trying to reconstruct events of, 15, 16, 17 years ago. There are a lot of people who are trying to help, but until relatively recently, there wasn't any one person in charge of trying to get everything together and get the, information as accurate as possible. I think the people in the White House did the best job they could. I think that we did the best job we could trying to remember things, and oftentimes having to search to see whether we had any records. I mean, I don't know how many of you keep, records from 1978 or 79, but I mean, we went through a lot of effort to try to see whether we had anything so that we could answer questions and then make things available. Sometimes we'd find part of something, sometimes we'd then find the rest of it. So I appreciate and understand the concern about, why we would have to add information or go back and say, well, this needs to be corrected. But the fundamental facts have not changed. I mean, the fundamental facts are, as I have said, I opened an account with my money. I made the trades. It was non-discretionary. I took the risk. I was the one who made the decision to stop trading. And that I did rely on Jim Blair. I used some other advice as well, but he was my principal advisor in this.
But that wasn't a question of documents, that particular fact, the fact that he was really driving the trading for you. I guess I wanted to re-ask that question again. Why, that would be something you would remember or not remember without documentary support. So why was that fact not made clear? And were you essentially riding on his coattails when you traded?
No, I wasn't. I was riding on the money I invested. I don't know how any of you make investment decisions, but I like to listen to people I know and trust who I think know what they're doing. And he was somebody who I very much thought knew what he was doing, and was more than willing to share his information not only with me, but with many people, members of his family and other of his friends. And it was for all of us a decision to put ourselves basically at the mercy of the market. And as Jim Blair found out, he wasn't always right. He lost a lot of money. And I was lucky I didn't. But that was my decision. Yes.
Mrs. Clinton, a number of your old friends in Little Rock, Warren Stevens, I guess his old friend, Kurt Bradbury, Bill Bowen, people like that, had a meeting on March 31st. They've decided that really Arkansas has taken a beating. Portrayed in the words of one of them as a moral and ethical backwater, basically because people hear us saying it was done that way in Arkansas. How do you feel about what's happening down there and what's happening to those people who feel they're being hurt by events out of their control, and they feel that the state is not really being defended by you and your husband. I wonder if you'd address that.
Well, I feel very bad about it because I think Arkansas is a wonderful place and filled with some of the best people I've ever been privileged to know or work with. And I do think that many of the charges have been very unfair and have really lacked any historic or realistic context. I don't think it's necessary to point fingers at any other state in the Union to say that, you know, in every place there are people who have problems and there are people who cause problems. And I think that, you know, the state of Arkansas is a place that has, you know, just so much to be proud of. So I hope that we can get back to a more realistic assessment of what goes on there. Sure.
They've said, and specifically Bradbury and Mr. Stevens have said, that to a certain extent they feel you've brought this on yourselves, the two of you, but because of campaign statements about a decade of greed and just things that they feel, in their words, make it look like hypocrisy. That you were in the go-go trading, you were trying, as you said, an opportunity to make money, that just as they were, and they felt like they had been condemned by you, that people like that had been condemned by you during the campaign, and that now you were being shown to be doing the things you spoke against.
Well, Kurt and Warren have never said that to me, so I'll have to take your word for it. But I do think you raised an important question that I would like to talk about a little bit. You know, I was raised to believe that every person had an obligation to take care of themselves and their family. And that meant, you know, earning an income and saving and investing. You know, I was raised by a father who had me reading the stock tables when I was a little girl and started doing that with my daughter when she was a little girl. I mean, I don't think you'll ever find anything that my husband or I said that in any way condemns the importance of making good investments and saving, or that in any way undermines what is the heart and soul of the American economy, which is risk-taking and investing in the future. What I think we were saying is that, like anything else, that can be taken to excess. When companies are leveraged into debt, when loans are not repaid, when pension funds are raided, you know, all of the things that marked the excess of the 1980s are things which we spoke out against. I think it's a pretty long stretch to say that the decisions that we made to try to create some financial security for our family and make some investments come anywhere near there. I also think that, you know, my husband and I made different choices than to concentrate on making money during the 1980s. We obviously wanted enough financial security to send our daughter to college and put money away for our old age and help our parents when we could. But we were primarily interested in his case, in trying to provide opportunities for people in Arkansas and make a difference in their lives. And what I tried to do, both to help him and to work on behalf of children or education reform, was what was really important to us. So I think that is, you know, something that needs to be put again into a proper perspective. Yes.
Somewhat in the same vein, you were reported to have opposed a special prosecutor, at least in the beginning, and some of the release of tax documents on the basis of privacy, that you felt you had a right to privacy. Do you think that that helped to create any impression that you were trying to hide something?
Yes, I do. And I think that is probably one of the things that I regret most, and one of the reasons why I wanted to do this, because I've had to really do a lot of thinking the last couple of months. You know, again, I was raised to really believe that what was important was what you thought about yourself and how you measured up to the standards you set for yourself. And I think if my father and mother said anything to me more than 1,000,000 times, it was, don't listen to what other people say. Don't be guided by other people's opinions. You know, you have to live with yourself. And I think that's good advice. I mean, I'm glad I got it as a girl growing up, and I've passed it on to my daughter. But I do think that that advice and my belief in it, combined with my sense of privacy, because I do feel like I've always been fairly private person leading a public life, led me to perhaps be less understanding than I needed to of both the press and the public's interest as well as right to know things about my husband and me. So you're right, I've always believed in a zone of privacy, and I told a friend the other day that I feel after resisting for a long time, I've been rezoned, you know, and I now have a much better appreciation of what's expected, and not only what I have done, because I am extremely comfortable and confident about everything that I have done, but about my ability to communicate that clearly and to give the information that you all need. Now, to your other question about the special counsel, I was not the only one of my husband's advisors who questioned the idea of a special counsel. I think those of us who did were concerned about the precedent that would be set by having such an appointment made when none of the existing standards that had always been in place had been met. There was no credible allegation, you know, all of the things that usually are required. So I was questioning of that, but the president made the decision that we needed to get on with the business he came to Washington to do, and that this was an important step to take, and I respected that decision.
Yes. You represented Hayden McElroy in his lawsuit against Refco?
Yes,
Clients in the office?
yes, I was Arkansas counsel for Mr. McElroy.
Were you aware of the allegations against the company and against the Springdale office that he raised in his testimony? I know that you had withdrawn from the case by then,
Right.
but I wondered if you were aware of his specific allegations that trades were allocated by the brokers in Chicago on the instructions of the Springdale office after the close of business each day during the time you were trading?
No, not while I was trading, not at all. I did become aware of it when Mr. McElroy decided to bring his lawsuit, but I think there's a very important distinction. Mr. McElroy had a discretionary account. A discretionary account could therefore be influenced by the decision of the broker. I did not have a discretionary account, so even if Mr. McElroy's concerns were to have been found to have basis, which they didn't, he was not successful, that wouldn't have applied to my situation in any event. Yes.
Do you know anything about Mr. Foster's death? Do you know what he wanted to tell the president that he didn't get to tell him?
You know, I don't know that he wanted to tell the president anything. That's the first I've heard of that. My memory is that the president actually talked to Vince Monday night before he died, and when I talked with the president afterwards, he was stunned because the conversation was a very normal kind of a conversation, so I don't know.
I understood they made an appointment to talk not the next day, but Wednesday, and that would have been the day after he died.
I don't know. I don't know. Yes.
Yes, my question, I'd like a follow-up too. First one has to do with Susan McDougal. She said that she brought the documents of Whitewater over to you at the governor's mansion. Did you receive all the documents? And if so, what became of them?
I don't believe that we received all the documents in that way. Over the past several years, we have made a very deliberate effort to try to obtain documents, and every document that we have obtained has been turned over to the special counsel, no matter where it came from.
Yeah, my follow-up has to do with the death of Mr. Foster. The way his office was sealed, or the people who were in it, there's been a lot of criticism of the papers in Mr. Foster's office that some may have been removed.
Well, you know, I know there's been a lot of concern and criticism about that. I cannot speak to that in any detail, but I know that the special counsel is looking into the circumstances surrounding Mr. Foster's death, and I assume he will issue a report about that, which I hope will put all these matters to rest once and for all. Yes? Yes.
You said that just now that you decided that $1,000 was as much as you could risk. Can you tell us what your understanding was of how much you could be at risk with little amount of money that you and your family had then. We were told earlier that $1,000 was what you were asked to put in. And second of all, can you give us some explanation, given that a cattle contract at the time, just one contract was $1,200, for the mystery of the $5,300 that was made really in the course of one day, or at least a few days, in the first trade?
No, I can't. I do not remember any of those details. I've given you every record that I have about that. The $1,000 was what I wanted to start with, and it was what I thought was a good beginning, a good investment for me. And once I had made the initial return that I did, I reinvested that. This was a roller coaster, and what I believed was that I was getting very good information and that I would end up making money, but there were a couple of days when I lost money, and I knew that I would be responsible for any losses that I suffered. But I did reinvest, and I covered the losses by closing positions, and then I eventually stopped trading.
When you first started with $1,000, did you believe you were putting at risk more than $1,000?
I believe that was certainly possible, yes.
And why take such a risky investment?
Because I didn't think it was that big a risk, because I thought that Jim and the people he was talking with knew what they were doing. And, you know, I read a letter to the editor that somebody sent me in one of your newspapers, I think, which talked about a woman who invested $1,000 during the same time and made $750,000. Well, she had a stronger stomach than I did. I couldn't do that.
Can I ask you one more question about the $1,000, which is why the White House was reluctant to provide that figure when the news of your commodities trading first came out?
Because we didn't have the records in hand yet, and I didn't want somebody saying what I invested until we could actually get the records, because I thought that somewhere buried in some box I had some records left. I also thought perhaps I had my 1978 checks left, which apparently I do not have. That's why. Yes, Gwen?
The records released to us already showed that you withdrew a large amount of money, I think like $15,000 from the REFCO account at one point, and used it on the same day, made a $10,000 interest payment on the Whitewater investment, which would have reduced your tax liability. Was that the reason that was done?
I don't have any memory of that, Gwen. I mean, I'm not saying it was, I just don't have any memory. I mean, there would have been nothing wrong with it. It was my money, but I don't have any memory of that.
I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but your intention in making this investment was not to offset some of the liability for the Whitewater investment, real estate investment?
No, I mean, we went into Whitewater to make money, not to lose it. I mean, the embarrassing thing to me is that we ended up losing money, and it keeps being beaten like the deadest horse there is over and over again. But in 78, 79, and 80, we were still hopeful that we were going to make money on our investment in North Arkansas. And the payments we were making, which were to service the loans primarily, we knew we would have to do as part of our obligations under the joint and individual liability we had for the mortgage. But it, you know, when the 1980s began and real estate just took such a nosedive in Arkansas, I thought then, and I think the president did too, that it was going to be very hard. But we had to hang on because we couldn't get off the mortgage. I mean, we had signed, all four of us were individually responsible. If all the others had, you know, had some terrible accident, the one remaining would have been absolutely responsible for the entire debt. And so it was a situation we got into with the belief that it would be a good investment, and one that was, frankly, for us, a passive investment, because up until then, if you had a little retirement community or a retirement land in North Arkansas, people from the Midwest and South would buy the lots as fast as they could get them. And we didn't have anything to do with the operation or management of it. We just basically thought that eventually the payments by the owners of the lots would begin to pay us back and make a profit, and that never happened.
Yes. Carrying you to
yes.
The Whitewater development was set up, as you say, as a 50-50 partnership between the Clintons and the McDougalls, meaning that you were liable for 50% of the losses or 50% of the gains. And yet, by your own accounting, you lost half or even maybe a third of what McDougal's lost. This is according to the Lyons report. Doesn't that discrepancy represent some sort of a gift or gratuity?
No, and let me say that, yes, the ownership of the corporation was 50-50. The liability on the underlying debt was 100% for each one of us. I mean, there was no gift in that. When my husband and I signed that mortgage and when we re-signed guarantees, we assumed the whole responsibility. I mean, if